it probably, I'll start with a broad and somewhat obvious statement, but work has changed significantly over the last 18 months, right? Across industries, the way we think about our jobs, the way we do our jobs, the way we get to or don't get to our jobs has changed tremendously. And one clear kind of example of that change is something that's called, or frequently called, the Great Resignation. John, we've all seen reporting, that including some recent Vox Media reporting that cites a BLS statistic that 16 million people have voluntarily left their jobs between April and July of this year. That's a staggering number, a historical number, and it signals a lot of confidence in future prospects, right? If I leave my job, I'll find something better, but also reflects fatigue and dissatisfaction that the workforce writ large has with their employment. Has this impacted you as a leader and a hiring manager directly? And what are you seeing, and how are you adjusting to this specifically?
Yeah, it certainly has. And before I jump into that, like I'm really honored personally to be able to kind of share my point of view, a little bit of what we're doing as a company, but definitely to have Anna here as well, who the program that she leads in the Cox Business School has been doing a lot for many years about helping different companies prepare their workforce, grow different diverse groups into stronger leaders. And so as this topic came up, it was immediate for me to go, hey, really need to bring in somebody who has been looking at this for a longer time. So yeah, I can answer lots of questions about the here and now and a lot of mistakes I feel like I've made personally. But we're trying to learn and appreciate having Anna here too. But back to your question, the Great Resignation, it makes great headlines, things that we stop and watch and listen to. And while there certainly is, right, big numbers of people who are resigning and doing other things, it feels in my experience, what I'm seeing at my own company, what I'm hearing about in peers in this marketing industry is really a bit more of the great job reconsideration, the great job swap, the great personal rethink that's going on. And I don't actually see a situation where we can't find and hire great people, but the questions that we're getting in that hiring process are really, really different. I want to step back a little bit. Earlier this year, I read this big work trend index that Microsoft had put investment in, that Edelman helped produce. It was 30,000 respondents in 31 countries, so really robust. And I had a really a moment as a manager that completely froze me and terrified me when I saw one of their stats was showing this. It was actually more than 20. It was 23% gap between how leaders were feeling versus how their people were feeling, and it's generic, right, across all these countries and different industries, et cetera. But the gap was in perceptions of how is this new hybrid, more virtual work environment going, and there was this much bigger percentage of senior leaders who manage people who said that they were thriving. And as I'm reading this, I go, well, I feel like I'm thriving. We're doing lots of work. We're more productive than ever. I have some flexibility. Yes, work has been insane, but it's always been that way. And so it's all good. And as I read this, I realized that I think I was part of that problem. I hearken back to a prior management experience at a company that was doing rapid growth and went from like 4 people on my team to almost 100 at the peak, and we were all traveling in different places. But there came this moment where where things were really falling apart. Like I was not leading effectively. My people were saying it. We restructured everything. And it was a big learning, probably a failure, but not a failure if you continue to learn kind of moment. And I felt like I had this again this year when I saw that report and went, wow, what am I doing as a leader to make sure, am I being a leader by making sure that that I'm adjusting, that my team is all thriving, that they've got the things that they need. I don't want to be part of the 40% of the global workforce that many other reports have said that are looking for a job or will change a job in a given year. Like, am I going to be sitting here alone? Is my company not going to be able to innovate and do its work because of misperceptions that I have, trying to do work the same way but in a remote scenario, not bringing in the tools and the things that I need. So we've been trying a lot of various things. We certainly have seen impact, but it's been a real big reflection moment, I think for many. And I'd say if I summarize all of it, and I had lots of examples, but if I summarized all of it, there is not one size fits all. And sometimes as managers, we'd love to kind of say, well, here's the new way, here's the model, and it's wonderful for all, right? Like, you like it, let's go. And that is, that's not it. There's different needs for every person. I don't know, Anna, you and I have talked about this a little bit too, and if you have other thoughts and examples of what you're seeing across other companies.
Well, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head when it comes to not one size fits all. And I think especially when you look at it from a D&I lens, right? And you look at it from a minority leader that's within a predominantly Caucasian work environment, it becomes even more apparent that not one size fits all, right? And so, but you also gave us what companies need to do more of, and that's listen. And I love what you spoke about with intention and really paying attention to what your team members, to what your employees, what they're needing. Because I think right now, more than anything, we've all had to reshift. We've all had to look at priorities. And it's been, especially for me personally, it's been such a huge just wake up call. So what can we do to help, all of our workforce, but then especially some of our most vulnerable, some of the ones that are, traditionally feel more invisible, right? So I think it becomes an even bigger issue when you look at it through that lens. But at the end of the day, for me, all of this just goes to show that we all have more in common than we do differences, right? When we're all faced with the global pandemic. And so listening and being empathetic is more important now than ever. So when I think about what companies are doing to adjust, it's having leaders like you, right, that are truly listening to what their team members need, right? Because it's changed so much drastically, and it seems like it changes every 3 months, right? And so it's no longer the norm. We can no longer just going with the flow, or we'll just get it done. Everything now is so different and complicated. But then there's also just we're also looking at more innovative ways of getting things done. And I know in the last 18 months, I mean, my work has just soared because I feel like I've been more empowered. And so anyway, that's just a little bit about what I feel like companies really need to do. But like I said, John, you are doing exactly what more people need to be doing.
Yeah, thank you. Trying, never getting it right. You just keep trying.
But showing that self-awareness, John, and fortunately reading that study and coming to the realization that, hey, I need to pay attention to this sort of perception gap. What do you do next? So you read that study, you understand that, hey, I might think that we're thriving, but it sounds like broadly the workforce doesn't feel that way. Do you circle back to individuals to talk about creating, rather than broad policies on how work should happen, more personally tailored, and to Anna's point, personally tailored specifically for people who may not feel heard or empowered to kind of advocate for their specific needs? How do you then approach that in a situation where there's so many diverse need states?
Yeah, that's the right question, right? It's one to realize it. Next, what do you do? And Anna mentioned it. It's been a consistent listening tour of people of all backgrounds, different locations, different levels in the company. And we're talking about this here because this, regardless of your company and where you are in your career, this applies to everyone. So it's been really interesting whether I have talked to people at the C level or whether I've talked to people who are fresh out of college, first time job. Everybody has a point of view, and Anna said it, like there's so many things that we have in common. A couple of very practical things that I picked up here. One was from a person pretty junior in their career who put 15 minutes on my calendar and just said virtual water cooler. And I hadn't talked to this person in a long time, and I just thought, that's brilliant. And we got on the phone and I just said, how many times have you been doing this? Like, how has this worked? And that was our water cooler, was like, what have you learned? Because I want to learn from you. Here's somebody who's, a couple years into their career, and, I don't have all the answers, and I've been around for a few decades plus. So that was awesome. And I've used it. I've just done one. We're about to have a second one with some of my peers in my group. So we've got, a few gray hairs and time under our belts. And did the same thing. I'm like, wow, this is brilliant, but it's been different topics. That's been one easy one. Another that has been probably the most profound that I think everyone can do, and this came from an idea of somebody on my team, actually somebody who's been in a contract role with us for a long time. And that was in our, we do, all kinds of different meetings to stay connected, but we had one that really was just a more casual, it was a stand-up meeting, kind of catch up. And I was trying to reduce meetings and with cutting it out. And her idea was, hey, instead of doing that, why don't we just turn the mic over to different people? Instead of it being an update on different projects, like what's on your mind? And in those sessions, as we've turned it over, and every person on the team has contributed, and now it's gone around several times, we've talked about billionaires going to space. Like, wow, that's kind of fascinating. What's going on? We're an advertising team. A few times we've talked about different ad campaigns, and I really wonder what the brief was behind that. Did they nail this? That was really kind of interesting. But we have shed tears together as a team. Earlier this year in May, when it was Mental Health Awareness Month, somebody brought that topic in, and people shared experiences with depression. How things are facing them. And I'm not, embarrassed to say I was one of those who was in tears, and it bonded us. And what I liked about it is, go back to this point that everyone has different needs. By turning over the microphone, by turning over the meeting and not pretending that you have all the answers as a leader, you can create this safe environment that everything's going to be covered. And when everyone has participated in your team, in your process, they own a piece of it. And that makes all the difference.
Yeah, I think that's a really kind of important story to relay, because one of the things that it gets at is the fact that people in a company like AT&T want and need different things from the work experience, right? And if you remove them from an office for all or part of the time, then that thing may be missing, right? And if you depend on or rely upon your work life to have impactful and meaningful conversations about things like mental health, and that's taken away, along with all the sort of typical things that change with a shift to hybrid or remote work, that can be really impactful, and it can certainly impact somebody's satisfaction with their job. So finding ways to recreate those interactions and facilitate those conversations, which don't, directly or obviously impact the bottom line, can be a really powerful thing. I know we've taken steps at Vox to figure out ways to allow employees to continue interacting independent of their specific day-to-day responsibilities or roles, and that's been essential in keeping the culture going. Anna, you mentioned that your productivity has, I think you said, skyrocketed, which is impressive, and I want to hear a little bit more about how you've been able to do that, given the shift and how the shift has impacted you personally.
Well, yeah, happy to share. And I think for me personally, before I went into higher education, I was in corporate America. And so I was a Latino within in financial in the financial world, right? I was in banking. And so being one of the few women and then one of the even fewer women of color, for me, it was very difficult, right? And I've always been very transparent and open about how my experience was in corporate America, which is one of the reasons why I love the work that we do at the LLI, because we're very much focused on helping companies be more inclusive, right? And especially with what's happened recently, the protests of last summer, it really did show the need that companies have to focus on this. And one of the biggest misconceptions is that diversity is only for minority leaders. And that is definitely not the case. Not only is there a business case for why it's important to invest in, your underrepresented groups, but also inclusion means everyone, right? Everyone belongs. And when everyone belongs, then you have more of a coordinated action. And I think that's what really does. You have more innovation. I mean, it's just, there's so many studies that have been showing this for the last 20, 30 years, but it wasn't until recently that we started paying attention to that. And I think, last summer was a up call, right? Along with the pandemic, of the protests. And so for me, I think it was not just the listening that John spoke about, which I believe is so important, but also there was action behind it. And I think that is exactly what companies need to look at right now, is not just listening, but also putting action. And we don't all have the right answers, and we're going to make mistakes, but there needs to be some sort of action and intention put into your workforce, right? For everyone. And I think for me, that's what's helped, my personal, it's been very, not only is this a time that we're talking about more about authenticity and we're able to have conversations, and D&I isn't a bad word anymore, but it's more about how can we all come together to not just work together better, but to just, have a more complete, I don't want to say fulfilling life, because it makes it sound like, it's all, kumbaya, but at the same time, I think people are starting to blend more of their personal with their work life. And I think that's so important, to make sure that, workforce and it stays productive, right? And so again, I'm probably getting way too much into the touchy-feely, but for me, it's just been so inspiring to just see that these conversations are taking place, but also that there's action put behind it. So
this kind of, commitment to inclusion and DE&I is something that the corporate world's been talking about, certainly since before the pandemic. Companies' values are more obvious now than they've ever been before, and also more important to consumers and to the workforce. I do think that the pandemic, maybe threatened that as a priority for companies, as there were these sort of, existential challenges from the outside that the pandemic created. And if it seemed that maybe companies would be forced to reprioritize, in the name of survival, it seems now that maybe, a year and a half later, we're seeing the opposite, and that this moment maybe is an opportunity to actually increase the emphasis on DE&I. And I think in large part because of the flexibility inherent in hybrid or remote work, can have an impact on advancing equity and inclusion in corporations like AT&T or Vox Media. Have you seen companies taking full advantage of this moment as a way to kind of increase that emphasis?
I mean, definitely across all industries, everyone right now, every single company is looking at this, and whether it's for or because they're being called at the end of the day at this. And I think that's what's really important. And so we've been doing this work at the LLI for the last 11 years, right? And so, but it wasn't. So we've always worked with companies on how to help them attract, develop, and retain their high-performing minority talent. But it's really been the last 18 months where companies are looking at this and saying, what can we do to make sure that everyone is a part of this conversation? And I think, like I said earlier, inclusion is the goal, right? That sense of belonging for everyone, especially for people that feel invisible, but also for people that just may not understand the benefits of having a more workforce. And I think with that paired with growing demographics, I mean, the numbers don't. The last census, we don't even have the final findings from it yet. But the amount that has been released just shows how the population is growing and how the white population is shrinking. And the numbers, just like I said, they're staggering when you look at the representation. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. But the fact that every company is looking at their numbers and reporting their numbers, which before it was so difficult to even get them to admit that. And even so, I think just in working one-on-one with companies, it's also been something to where they want more of that authenticity versus the assimilation. I think 20 years ago, you know, when we were graduating from college, it was more about assimilation. And now there is a big push for, because that doesn't help anyone, right? You don't get the full benefits of having a diverse workforce if everyone assimilates. So I think there's such an intention put behind that authenticity, I think, and an encouragement. So like I said, it's far from perfect. We have so much work to do, but at least there's the ground right now that of like we should take advantage of this opportunity. John, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, I know. I've heard you talk about the DE&I opportunity from a purely financial standpoint as well. It's kind of, it feels wrong to do that, but if you didn't care about any of it, like there are study after study that show that more diverse teams, right? It's just different perspectives, right? Actually have better financial returns for their investors, right? You see it over time. It's like, if all you care about that black and white, you know, profit margin, which pays for all the bills, right? It works. But this moment is one where we certainly have gone beyond that. It doesn't matter what your background, your ethnicity is. We're all very aware of the culture of work and our own personal lives, and we want that right mix. I think if there was one other thing that makes this, and I think this can be quite tangible, actionable for a lot of companies, is really partnering with their diverse employees. Some mid-sized to larger companies have employee resource groups, employee groups of various types. We just finished last week, I think it was last Friday, just a few days ago, was AT&T's annual employee resource group conference. The entire company, is invited, being virtual meant, there were thousands and thousands of people there. And what I find as a key opportunity, and we're doing some of this in some places, I think there's more that we could leverage, is here are bodies of employees who are so far leaned in. And they're not just leaned into it's not a personal agenda. It's, I work at this amazing company that's giving me this opportunity. I'm with like-minded people. We want to drive change in our companies. We want to do the right things with our customers. I mean, in our case, it's not just, ethnically oriented groups, but it's, different religious, backgrounds, different orientations, to groups that focus on certain customer sets. And so when you're looking across one of these things in the great, part of the subheads in the great resignation is employees not being engaged. Well, you've got bodies of people who, if you asked them, would lean in with you, would help you solve problems, would go to bat, be advocates for your company. So if the financial side of it isn't enough, or there's other blockers, like, unleash your people. And your diverse groups are the most passionate of your employees. So it's sitting there for every company to take advantage of.
Yeah, I can attest to the power of ERGs to help educate a company broadly and to drive change and to just circulate important information and start important conversations. We've seen them be incredibly effective at Fox Media. It's nice to know that AT&T has such a commitment to employee resource groups as well. Speaking specifically about the shift to hybrid, right, and the impact that it's going to have on companies' abilities to further their efforts in DE&I. One of the impacts that I've seen personally is that, as we're trying to fill available roles at Fox Media, we have fewer constraints when it comes to hiring, specifically because we've realized that for a lot of roles, location isn't as important as maybe we'd previously thought it was. That, by definition, broadens the talent pool, which allows us to source a more diverse candidate pool because it's larger. have you seen that, and is that sort of a sustainable approach to hiring? Are companies taking advantage of the fact that, if you look at diverse populations within the country, location has a significant impact. If you can suddenly start hiring from a place that's maybe demographically different from the place where you're based, is that having an impact and an effect? Anna, you've probably being the expert here, you've probably seen the impacts of that most directly.
Yeah, no, well, I'm far from the expert, but thank you. I think what it speaks back to what John was talking at the beginning is listening, right? So really thinking about wanting and wanting to attract a more diverse candidate pool. I think it's so important versus just, doing the standard. I think it's thinking outside the box to say, how can we attract? And like you said, when looking at different locations that may be more diverse than where you're based. It's also looking at things like cultural norms. How can you remove some of those barriers potentially? Right. And so, but again, it goes back to talking to your diverse employees to say, well, what can we do to make it easier, for more people to say yes to our company, especially if they have, different cultural backgrounds. I think it's so important.
I think the days of just posting a job ad and organically, I don't know, hoping the stars will align somehow in the universe that magically you get the right people that show up. That's always been a fairy tale. Like, who shows up is who happened to just show up. It's not being intentional about the growth and future of your company. So without making any of my peers or my team members who might be listening or watch this later a little nervous, I've been doing a lot of research into what other companies are doing and how they're hiring. And there are a few standouts. I mentioned Microsoft because of this work trend report. I worked there years ago for quite a while as well, but they've had tens of thousands of jobs that are up and open. And in almost all cases, the location is anywhere in the U.S. And I could go on. There's a lot of other companies this way. If you go and do the job search, little queries and notifications through LinkedIn, you'll find that things are being listed in different cities because that location is mattering less and less. And I think that is great, because if I've got a friend who's pretty senior leader in the Minneapolis area, and they just don't have the kind of Latino populations and pools that I'm talking to in Dallas, or if I were in Arizona or Florida or somewhere else, and you just look at demographics and where people's families are, and that's kind of the case. So, but that friend and this big brand, they're selling across this country internationally. And so if you just look at the demographics of this country or anywhere else, like, wait a second, our leadership does not represent the customers that we're selling to. Could we be more successful if we understood our customers? Nah, that's crazy thinking. Let's just do it the way we have, right? Let's let the stars align and tell us who to hire. Like, come on. Like, it's super simple, I think. And I don't mean to make light of the situation at all. It's right there. It's right there in front of us. And then so many companies are going to more hybrid environments. So somebody's in the office on occasion, or you have some intentional times that are scheduled. Flying somebody in from Dallas to Minneapolis, like that's not a hard flight, especially when you get the benefit of having a more diverse workforce.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the days of posting a job online and just hoping that you get, qualified candidates that represent the demographics of your customer base, those days are done. They're long gone.
They're done. Yeah.
So there are some clear and obvious benefits of virtual or hybrid work, right? But that being said, historically, most examples of successful companies and all the sort of, founder myths that we've heard, stories of startup and engineers working together in garages or teams in advertising, creative teams pulling all-nighters with good catering and nice offices, like that all happened in person. Are we gonna go back to that quickly? Is hybrid or virtual work, are those cultures a fad? Is this specifically a pandemic thing, or is this the way it is now and forever? What are your thoughts on that, Anna?
Yeah, happy to go first. I think this is the new normal, right? I personally do not, and in the companies we work with, there's not a plan to go back to how it used to be, right? I think everyone's kind of moved past that point. So now it's what works best, right? What is going to work for us in the future? And a big part of that is that wake up call that we talked about at the very beginning of our session, right? And making sure that companies are taking advantage of this hybrid work model, right? But I think these things are even more important nowadays. I forget who did the study. I think it was Deloitte, but there was a study recently done where people were willing to take a $10,000 pay cut if they could continue working flex hours and working from home. And I think that just speaks volumes, because before, dollar was king, and now there's other things that are more important. And I think companies that are able to capitalize on that are really going to be successful in what that new normal looks like, post-pandemic, which if we ever get to that point. But I think at this point, there's no way that we're ever going to go back to how things used to be. John, I don't know.
I couldn't agree more. We're not going back to the way that things used to be. My addition is that doesn't mean that it's 100% virtual. Like it isn't, you could over rotate too much, because I think there are people who prefer, in person. I talked before about, like, as I've been out listening, like I've got all different types of needs. And some people need and want to have that face-to-face interaction all the time. So great, like that's enabled. But we've seen this cyclically, in workplace culture, right? It used to be the place where everybody had their own office and they would close their door. We went to cubicles, high walls, low walls, glass walls, to none whatsoever. Just come in and hot desk, and it's wonderful. All the collaboration. Well, we certainly collaborated a lot, but we didn't get a lot of work done a lot of days too, right? You would go home to do work in the evening or the weekend, and all of that is exactly what Anna's saying. Like, we're not going back to that. But you could over pivot here too and be like, look, the only time that we will see each other will be, as a certain size number of pixels on a screen. And I don't think that's happening either. But there's so many examples. I was a part of a private panel a couple of weeks ago, and there was a very senior person from a brand everybody would recognize, happened to be in real estate, and we're talking about how they had given this offer to a person who was highly sought after, plenty of money, and it's been all this time. A week after the job had been accepted, got a call saying that they were declining the offer, and they tried to figure out why, because they had just done all of these things. And the answer really shocked them and really shocked me. The person was taking a bit of a pay cut, to what Anna's saying. Like, the money wasn't as important as flexibility. But the one I heard as somebody in telecom was that the company did not give their employees corporate cell phones. Thought, well, wait, so you're going to use your own phone for work? No. Like, the culture was such that you did your work during office hours. And sometimes those were at home, sometimes those were in the office, sometimes those were traveling. But there was no corporate cell phone, as a way to rid ourselves of the chain of being connected 24/7. And so this is a very senior role, right? It's not somebody, who wanted to, do hashtag van life for the summer and, wasn't really engaged. Like, this was a senior position. And so, and lots of other examples of where culture, balance, respecting each other's diversity is the norm. We're not going back to a world without it. Or certainly companies that want to be around in 10 years from now and successful won't go back to it, because people will leave. That's where the great resignation will come. Will be companies that are trying to go back to the old model. If I don't see you, I don't believe that you're working. That thinking is got a time limit.
That is spoken like somebody who read a Microsoft work trend survey and recognized that there was a significant difference between his attitude and those of his company.
It scared me. I thought, because I thought I was, I was thinking of everything was good, and I was right there on the page.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, and the idea that, giving somebody the opportunity to disconnect is thought of at this point as somewhat revolutionary, is kind of eye-opening, and let's hope that trend multiplies.
But I want to say one more thing on it. Like, disconnecting doesn't mean that we're talking about people who don't want to work and aren't like innovating, right? It's just, it is different. Like, give the time, the flexibility, so that people do great work when they're working, not the impression of working because I'm, I didn't leave the office till 10 o'clock last night and I was on a 5 a.m. call. Like, that pride was never productive.
It goes back to the authenticity theme we talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Seems like we're almost out of time. Before we sign off, I want to just get a little bit personal. Can you two tell me how your professional lives have changed as a result, how your personal lives have changed? Is there an example of something that hybrid or remote has given you the ability to do that's benefited you or your families?
Yeah, so John, I'm happy to go first. I have three girls in my house between the ages of 17 down to 7. And last year when COVID hit and schools closed, I turned into, I still worked full time, but I was also a stay-at-home mom that was homeschooling her children. And so that personally was something I was not, teachers do not make enough money, so I'm going to say, but it was such a great learning experience for all of us, but also it was a bonding moment. So I think for me personally, I never thought I'd have, be with my family 24/7. And it's time that, it was crazy, but it was also like just so beautiful to be able to enjoy them for as long as we did. And even now it's like things have definitely changed, right? We've got used to being at home, and that's something that, we're never going to go back to the other way it used to be.
Yeah. For me, I'm having lunch most days of the week, or 3 days a week with my daughter when she decides that she wants a break from high school. Yesterday we were on a team meeting and she was walking by. She was going to a dress rehearsal for a musical that she was in, and I was like, "Hey, come on over." And I just put her on our team meeting and introduced her to a few other people, because I totally love and adore her. And it's been the best thing about the flexibility is being able to be a more engaged parent when it works for them, right? Instead of saying, I'll get back to you when I'm free. Like, no, let's talk now. I'll come back to work.
Yeah, that's great. And,
awesome.
And thank you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
So
all.
much.
What an amazing topic. I could spend probably all afternoon talking through this. As Basis Technologies, we have about 850 employees. We are fully flex, and we opened the offices about a month ago. Since then, we are averaging about 4% of our population actually coming in.